Mom told me, "Don't celebrate your son's birthday, it'll upset the golden grandchild." I nodded, said nothing and drove off that night. A year later they saw my boy cutting his cake surrounded by friends, gifts and laughter. My brother's envy tore every thread holding the family together. I always knew my son wasn't the favorite, but it didn't fully hit me until my mother told me not to celebrate his birthday. It started small, the kind of favoritism you brush off because you don't want to believe it's real. Caleb, my brother Daniel's son, was always treated like royalty. Every visit came with new toys, photo sessions, praise and stories about how smart or talented he was. Meanwhile Mason, my son, barely got a passing glance. If he drew something it was cute. If he scored high on a spelling test they'd nod and change the subject. It stung but I told myself not to make a big deal. I didn't want to sound bitter or paranoid. We were all living under one roof at the time. My parents' house. Me, Mason, my sister Rachel and my parents lived there full-time. Daniel had his own place with his wife, but they came over almost every weekend like they owned the place. I'd been trying to save up money to get out, but between work, childcare and helping with bills, it was slow going. So I kept planning. I had this goal in my head. Mason's 7th birthday was going to be different. I started planning months in advance. Nothing outrageous, just a good, fun party in the backyard with decorations, games, food and maybe a magician if I could swing it. Mason deserved one good memory, something that was just for him. I imagined him running around with his friends, eating too much cake, smiling nonstop. He didn't ask for much. He never complained, even when Caleb got 5 gifts for just visiting, and he got nothing. So one evening I brought it up at dinner. I said I wanted to throw Mason's birthday party at the house, invite some of his friends from school, maybe have a cookout with family. My mother didn't even look at me. She was slicing a baked potato and said flatly no. Just like that. No explanation at first. Just no. I thought I'd misheard so I asked again. She said she didn't want that kind of noise or fuss in the house. That it wasn't necessary. Then she said something I'll never forget. She told me it wouldn't be fair to Caleb. That Caleb might feel left out. That it could hurt his feelings if Mason got a party and he didn't. I couldn't respond. My mouth opened but nothing came out. I looked around the table. My dad was chewing silently like he hadn't heard anything unusual. Rachel glanced at me but quickly looked down at her phone. No one said a word in my defense. Daniel wasn't even there, but somehow the conversation revolved around his child's comfort. Mason, who was sitting next to me, quietly eating his dinner, had no idea what had just happened. And I think that's what got me the most, how normal this was for them. How easy it was to dismiss my son like he wasn't even in the room. I nodded. I stood up. I cleared our plates and walked back to my room like everything was fine. That night, after Mason fell asleep, I packed everything we owned into 2 suitcases and a few trash bags. Clothes, school supplies, his drawings, our toothbrushes. I didn't even tell anyone I was leaving. At 1:30 in the morning, I lifted Mason into the car while he slept, buckled him in and drove off. No plan, just this overwhelming certainty that staying any longer would be a betrayal to my own child. I had no apartment, no job lined up outside of what I was already doing remotely, but I had to get out. And the wild part? No one called. Not the next day. Not the next week. Not ever. They didn't come looking for us. Didn't check if we were safe. Didn't ask where Mason was or why we left. They just let us go like we were nothing. A year passed. And then came Mason's 8th birthday. That first year on our own was hard, but not in the way people might expect. It was hard because of how quiet it got. There was no one around to second-guess my parenting, no passive-aggressive comments about how I dressed Mason or what I packed in his lunchbox. No more walking on eggshells to avoid being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. For the first time in years, I could just be his mom. We stayed in a small studio for the first 3 months. It was tight, but Mason didn't complain once. He loved helping me cook, loved that we could dance to music without anyone telling us to keep it down. Every night, we'd lie on the mattress on the floor, watch cartoons on my laptop, and talk about what kind of house we'd get one day. By month 4, I landed a higher-paying remote job through a client I used to freelance for. Within weeks, I'd signed a lease on a sunny 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. Nothing fancy, but it felt like a palace compared to where we came from. Mason got his own room. I decorated it with glow-in-the-dark stars and space posters. I bought him a fish tank. He named all the fish after Marvel characters. I didn't hear from my parents. Not once. Not for my birthday. Not for Thanksgiving. Not even on Christmas. They didn't check if Mason was okay. Didn't ask where we went. Daniel didn't send a single message. It was like we vanished and they were fine with that. And that told me everything I needed to know. By the time Mason's 8th birthday rolled around, I was ready. I had money saved, a stable home, and a list of kids from school he wanted to invite. I rented a bounce house, hired a magician, ordered a custom cake shaped like a rocket ship, and lined the yard with blue and silver balloons. I even booked a photographer. If no one else ever documented his milestones, I would. That day felt like a dream. The yard was full of laughter, spilled juice boxes, and running feet. Parents chatted under the patio lights. Mason beamed from ear to ear the entire time. He wore the little birthday crown I'd made him and proudly introduced me to every kid that walked through the gate. There were gifts stacked on the table. Board games, books, Lego sets. Things he would have never gotten at my parents' house, where even a pack of markers would have been considered too much. At sunset, we lit the candles. Everyone sang. Mason made a wish and cut the cake. I took a picture of him mid-laugh, frosting on his cheek, holding up a sparkler like it was the best day of his life. And then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I posted the photos on Facebook. It had been a year. I hadn't blocked anyone, just figured they weren't interested. But that night I uploaded a full album, Mason's birthday blast-off. Smiles, decorations, the cake, the magician pulling a bunny out of a hat, even a slow-mo video of Mason sliding down the inflatable slide. I wrote a short caption, a day filled with joy, love, and everything he deserves. I went to bed feeling good. I didn't think much of it, until the next afternoon when my doorbell rang, and I opened it to find my brother Daniel standing there, phone in hand, shaking with rage. I didn't even recognize the car at first. It wasn't Daniel's usual black SUV. It was our dad's old silver sedan, the one he only drove when something was wrong. The fact that it was parked across my driveway, crooked and blocking the mailboxes, should have told me this wasn't going to be just a drop-by. Mason was inside playing with his new art set. He had no idea what was about to happen, and I wanted to keep it that way. I opened the door and saw all three of them, Daniel, my mother, and my father, standing shoulder to shoulder like some weird family tribunal. I hadn't seen them in almost exactly a year, and not one of them even said hello. Daniel was the first to speak. He lifted his phone up toward my face and asked if I thought this was funny. At first I didn't understand what he meant, so I just stared at the screen. It was my Facebook post. Mason smiling. The cake. The balloons. Every comment underneath praising how beautiful the party looked. One even said he's lucky to have such a wonderful mom. Daniel kept going. Said I was petty. Said I was trying to make a statement by not inviting the family. My mom jumped in, asking how I could host something so big and not even let them know. My dad, usually the quiet one, said I disrespected them and embarrassed the whole family online. Embarrassed them. I reminded them that a year ago, I was told not to throw Mason a party at all because it might hurt Caleb's feelings. I reminded them that they didn't call, text, or check on us once after we left. My mom waved that off like I was being dramatic again. She said if I'd just waited, they would have eventually come around. I was standing there in my own doorway in a house I worked my ass off to afford, with my son finally having the childhood I'd dreamed of for him, and they were acting like I'd committed a crime by not inviting them to eat cake. They started raising their voices and I told them Mason was inside. My mom snapped that maybe he should hear how his mother had cut out her family and poisoned him against his grandparents. That's when I told them they needed to leave. I wasn't yelling. I didn't curse. I just said they weren't welcome here. Not today. Not anymore. Daniel laughed. Said, so now you think you're better than us just because you bought some balloons and cheap pizza? I didn't answer. He stepped closer like he wanted to come inside, but I blocked the door. That's when my mom said something that changed everything. She said, you'll regret this when Mason starts asking why he doesn't have a real family. Not a family. Not us. She said real family. As if the past year hadn't happened. As if what I gave Mason didn't count because it didn't include them. I told her he already had one. And I shut the door in their faces. They stood outside for a few more seconds before finally leaving. No apology. No goodbye. I watched their car pull away from the window. Mason came over and showed me a robot he'd built out of Lego. He asked who was at the door and I just said it was nobody important. But deep down I knew something had been set in motion. Daniel wouldn't let it go. And I had a feeling the real storm hadn't even started yet. For a few weeks after the door incident, things went quiet again. Almost too quiet. I kept expecting a follow-up text, a guilt-trippy voicemail from my mom, something. But nothing came. I checked my Facebook daily, half waiting for one of them to leave some bitter comment or vague post about disloyal daughters or entitled single moms. But there was radio silence. Until Caleb's birthday. I wasn't invited, obviously. But I found out about it because Rachel texted me. Not with an actual invitation, just a picture. Caleb in front of a mountain of gifts, streamers taped across the living room walls, and a massive cake shaped like a video game controller. She sent it with no message, just the photo. Felt like a message anyway. Then 2 nights later, I got a call from Mason's school. One of the teachers wanted to give me a heads up. There had been an incident involving Caleb. Apparently, Caleb had started bragging to other kids that Mason's party wasn't real. That it was fake. That the magician was his uncle dressed up. That the bounce house was rented with mommy's borrowed money. And that Mason had to live in a dirty little shack. Mason didn't fight him. He just walked away. But I could tell something was off when he came home that day. He was quiet. Ate his dinner in silence. Later that night, I asked him about school and he just said Caleb didn't like his party. That's all he said. Caleb didn't like my party. Not that he was mean. Not that he lied. Just that. Like Caleb's opinion had weight. Like it mattered more than all the other kids who had fun that day. That was the first time I really felt fury. Not annoyance, not disappointment. Fury. I texted Rachel. Asked if she knew what Caleb had said. She read the message and didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. Then came the letter. It showed up in my mailbox on a Friday afternoon. A thick envelope addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. I opened it thinking, naively, that maybe it was an apology. Some attempt at reconciliation. But inside was a typed letter. 3 pages. Signed by my father. It was a list. A list of all the things I had done to fracture the family. Leaving in the middle of the night like a thief. Posting photos online to humiliate them. Turning Mason against his roots. Not showing gratitude for the roof over our heads they provided for years. Ignoring family events and milestones. Creating division between the cousins. And finally, the suggestion that Mason might need masculine guidance before it was too late. That last line chilled me. It wasn't even subtle. It was Daniel all over it. They weren't just hurt. They were planning something. They wanted control back. And they were going to try to get it, through Mason. After I read the letter, I sat at my kitchen table for almost an hour just staring at it. It was written like a legal document. Emotionless, clinical, like someone preparing for a custody case. Not that they had a leg to stand on. No court would entertain something so baseless. But it wasn't about that. It was about pressure. Control. Fear. I didn't respond. I made a copy, filed it away, and told no one except my lawyer. Yes, I had one. After the way they dismissed Mason's birthday the first time, I started preparing for worst-case scenarios. I wasn't paranoid. I just knew what these people were capable of when they didn't get their way. 3 days later, Mason came home with something strange in his backpack. A brand new Nintendo Switch. We hadn't bought it. I asked him where it came from and he said Caleb gave it to him. At recess. Told him it was from Uncle Daniel. That night I called the school. Found out Daniel had started volunteering there. Once a week in the library. The same days Mason had after-school reading group. I asked Mason if Daniel had talked to him. He said yes a couple times. Just small things. Asking how school was, what games he liked, if he missed his old house. Once he even told Mason he could come visit Caleb anytime. He said, "We're still your real family, you know." Those were his exact words. Mason remembered them. That's when I lost it. I went to the school the next morning, sat down with the principal and laid it all out. Every bit of it. The sudden reappearance, the manipulation, the gift. I wasn't calm. I didn't pretend to be okay with any of it. I told them Daniel had no business talking to my child, let alone trying to bribe him. I demanded they remove him from all volunteer duties involving students, especially mine. They agreed. Quickly. But Daniel found out. And it only escalated from there. That weekend I got another letter. This time from a family lawyer. Not mine. Daniel and my parents had filed a petition to request grandparent visitation rights. Claimed I was unlawfully withholding Mason from his extended family. Claimed I left without notice. claimed Mason was being isolated. They were building a case. A fake one. But they had money and connections and they were banking on the idea that I'd get scared and fold. Dad, I hit back. My lawyer filed a response the same day. Included the first letter, the harassment at my home, the manipulation at school, the unapproved contact. We included photos, screenshots, even the ridiculous messages Daniel started sending me when he realized I'd blocked him on everything except email. He had written things like, "You'll regret cutting out blood and Mason will resent you when he's old enough to understand what you did." I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. Because I knew who these people were when the masks came off. They didn't want Mason. They wanted control. They wanted me back in my place. Under their roof, under their rules, raising a quiet, grateful son who knew he came second. But I'd already built something better. Something real. The court date was set for mid-June. In the weeks leading up to it, they started pushing harder. Family members I hadn't heard from in years messaged me saying I should forgive, that I was being cruel, that kids need their grandparents. One even said, "You'll destroy your son's future out of pride." Pride had nothing to do with it. It was protection. But none of them were prepared for what happened next. Because the day of the hearing, Mason did something no one expected. The court building was beige and cold like they always are. My palms were sweating, but I kept my face still. Mason sat beside me in a navy blazer I had to bribe him to wear. He held a little notebook in his lap. I hadn't asked what it was. Figured it was just doodles to keep him busy. Daniel was already in the courtroom when we walked in. My parents were beside him, dressed like they were attending a funeral. When my mother saw me, she didn't smile. She looked at Mason, then looked away. They'd brought their lawyer. A man in an expensive suit with the kind of practiced expression you only get from decades of winning cases that shouldn't be winnable. We sat. The judge walked in. Introductions, statements. Their lawyer went first. He painted a picture of a broken family torn apart by misunderstanding. He said my son had been cut off from stable, loving grandparents who'd supported him for years. Said my sudden departure was erratic. Said they only sought visitation, nothing more. Then it was my lawyer's turn. She laid everything out. The birthday incident, the silence that followed, the manipulative gifts, Daniel's unsanctioned presence at Mason's school, the letters, the social media campaign. And then she asked if I'd be willing to speak. I nodded. I kept it simple. I told the court I wasn't denying them out of spite. I was protecting my son from a family that never saw him as enough. I said Mason had never been their priority. I said they hadn't called once in a year. Not for him, not for me, and only came back around when it looked like we were doing just fine without them. The judge nodded, scribbled notes, then asked if anyone else wanted to speak. That's when Mason raised his hand. I froze. I hadn't told him to speak. I hadn't prepped him. I didn't even know he'd planned to say anything. The judge looked surprised but allowed it. She asked his name, then asked if he wanted to say something about the visits. Mason stood up, gripping his notebook. He flipped it open. He said, "I wrote something in case I got nervous." And then he read. He said he didn't miss anyone in this room except me. He said he used to think something was wrong with him because Caleb always got more hugs, more praise, more presents. He said he thought maybe he wasn't good enough. But then he said Mom showed me that wasn't true. He talked about our new house. His room. His fish. How no one ever yelled there. How he never felt small anymore. Then he closed the notebook and looked right at my mom. He said, "You told her not to let me have a birthday." No one said a word. The judge thanked him. Then recessed for 30 minutes. When she came back, it was short. Visitation request. Denied. The court did not find sufficient evidence of a meaningful prior relationship, nor did it find that granting visitation would serve the child's best interest. They lost. Not just the case, everything. Outside the courtroom, Daniel passed by without saying a word. My father lingered for a second, then followed him. My mother tried to approach Mason, reached for him, said his name. He stepped back. And I said quietly but clearly, "You made your choice last year." So did I. We walked out into the sun. Mason was smiling. He asked if we could get pancakes. I said absolutely. That was the last time we ever saw them. No letters. No calls. No more bribes wrapped in shiny paper. Just peace. And I swear to you, on every candle I've ever lit on that boy's birthday, I will never let them take that from him again.